What's going on, advocates? Welcome back to another edition of the Black Mental Health Podcast. I am your host, Reg. Joined today with me is a spiritual healer out here in this chaotic world. Um, now I could. How do you want to be identified? I never introduced anybody, but I want to make sure you have your own space. So should I say that your husband was on here before, or do we want to give it his own space?
Let's give it its own space. Let's
All
give it
right.
its own space.
All right. Well, I was introduced to this wonderful expert by her husband, and I've been meaning to catch this interview for a long time. But please introduce yourself to the people, and let them know a little bit about yourself.
All right. My name is Amobiye Fatola. Hello. Thank you for having me here. A little bit about myself. Well, first, let me say I am not a spiritual healer because I don't believe that any individual person can heal another person. I believe that we all have the power to heal ourselves. So I'm a spiritual healing facilitator. I
Mm.
work as a conduit. I work as a mirror. I work as a guide. I work in many different capacities. But I don't believe personally that the power to heal comes from like from me. I believe that it comes from the divine, and it's given to each and every one of us. So I just want to put that out there. That let me not step in space that I don't particularly own. But I am a spiritual life coach. I am a licensed professional counselor. I am a traditionalist, a practitioner of African traditional religion, a priest in African traditional religion. I am a student of the world. I'm just me. So, and I'm out here as part of my purpose is to facilitate healing, both within myself and within other people and for other people. So support that in the ways that I am gifted, called, and honored to be a part of.
Now I appreciate that correction too as well, and thank you again for coming on. But I do want to start right there, because we had a wonderful pre-call and had a conversation. It could have went on for hours. I knew it was going, so I had to cut it short because I know I wanted to capture the conversation in its essence as opposed to trying to recreate it or whatever the case may be. But how do
Absolutely.
how do you begin? I don't even want to say beginning because I know I want to word it correctly. How does one come to the space you are today?
Very, I guess, good question. I don't know that I would say I came to the space as much as I finally accepted being in the space that I was already placed in.
Mm.
I think that, I mean, from the time that I can remember, from the time I was born, um, I just had a knack for people. I've always been just intrigued by the human mind and how the mind operates and how there's so much variety. Just kind of being in one situation, right? There are so many different possibilities, and as many people as there are, there's that many possibilities. And so I was always just curious, watching kind of how people did things, why people did things, what was the impact on them, and then in addition, I became a confidant way before my time, having people come to me, kind of just being that person that people felt comfortable speaking with. And in the beginning, I guess it felt natural, but it also felt uncomfortable because, being a young child, like young, and having grown people come to me
Mm.
like, oh, I just need to talk to you. And I'm like, I don't think this is my business. I don't like, but then, just kind of be like, but it's just so natural. It's so comfortable talking to you. And I just feel like the insight. I've, learned that one of, I guess, my gifts is insight, is to be able to, I don't know, have to be part of a situation to have insight into the situation or a person. And so I think for a while I fought it. Um, kind of, I mean, I knew I wanted to work with people, but at the same time, it was like, this feels like a really big calling, and like, this is bigger than me. And I don't know if I'm worthy. And, I also, what does that mean? Because I want to be a person, I want to be in the world, and realizing that it doesn't mean anything except for what I accept it to mean and what I allow it to mean and what I am willing for it to mean for me and in my life. which ultimately led me to the formality of, okay, let me get my master's so that I can have, the letters behind my name, which are less important to me, but I know are important in the society that we live in, and to authenticate and validate that what I'm saying is not just kind of quackery, that I have some background in it. I've also initially, like when I took a coaching program that I was in, I actually didn't do it to support other people. It was really more so to kind of, how do I put the pieces? Like I have so many pieces, and what I envisioned, if I thought about it, was kind of, I felt like I had a puzzle, and I had like all the pieces, and there were certain parts of the puzzle that I had put like the pieces together, but I didn't have like the box, right? I didn't have, what does this look like? What is the picture supposed to be ultimately? And when I say the picture, I mean of myself. Like I have all of these different parts of me. I have all of these different things that I do and that I use, but it just doesn't seem to fit together. Like, how do I bring it together? And so the coaching program really was kind of, for me, how do I put those pieces together to be the finished product, right? Which the finished product was me, but like, how do I understand me? And from that, it of course allowed me to not just coach myself, but to be able to coach other people, um, and to really do join the pieces, like every single aspect of myself, and that in that case, every single aspect of your life is pertinent and integrated into every other aspect. Like there's no mutually exclusive, right? There are people who, it's like, oh, I'm a lawyer, but I'm really this. No, like you can be a dancer and bring dance into law, right? It's the values and the principles in dance that that integrate into law, or vice versa. Same thing, like being a lawyer and bringing that into dance. And so for me, it was kind of like the integration of it all. And I was born into ATR, so that's my foundation. That's just kind of, I guess, the fabric upon which I was weaved into this physical experience.
No, and I'm glad that you brought it in that context, because I think about a little bit of my journey and how I knew again, having those conversations as a child with adult that I wasn't supposed to be having as a child. And I knew, I won't say they were inappropriate, but it was a way above my age experience, not maybe my wisdom in its totality. And then
Mm-hmm.
going up and not realizing that my family's from the island, so I had a real Rastafarian experience, and I and the worldly, and talking in those the Bob Marley vibe for those who are not familiar. And then even with that, realizing that, going into that next level of like, all right, what's the academia side of these things that I'm, feeling and learning or kind of knowing. And then well, I don't know what the next level of that, and I probably would, that's something where, and I don't even know if it's levels, but more so like exposure to more information.
Mm-hmm.
Like what's the next level of exposure? But I guess going back a little bit, the question that I want to ask is, how do you and I ask this to a lot of counselors, especially, how do you combat a system that has westernized healing and commercialized healing versus the like I did, me and my wife were watching something around the ayahuasca healing this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's, for me, I'm making a claim now. It's the first time I'm openly speaking about it. That's the next version for me of like, what is that about? So how do you navigate that part of it as a practitioner, as a spiritual facilitator, like those type of things?
I mean, I think the first thing for me is it those are boxes and categories, right? I think that those are like filters, if you will, of how we, it's almost like sunglasses, right? And you can have so many different pairs of sunglasses. If you put on a sunglasses that are tinted yellow, you're going to see the world with a yellow tint. If you put on sunglasses that are tinted, blue or black, or whatever it is, that's how you're going to see the world. And so westernized culture and society is simply a filter. And um how I guess engage in it is, I mean, it's going to sound somewhat kind of cliche because it's very uh what's it called, clinical, or in terms of like the clinical, but unconditional positive regard is, but not from, not just as a statement of like, oh, I just, have unconditional. I really see individuals as individuals, and I don't believe that there's a right or wrong, like a universal right or wrong. I believe that it's right for an individual in that moment, in that context, in that environment. So it's not, I'm not, my purpose is not to impose my beliefs onto someone else. And a lot of times it really is a conversation. It's to kind of, what are your beliefs, right? And if they're operating within Western society or Western, beliefs, then that's fine. I don't need to combat those. I don't need to confront them necessarily. I don't need to conflict, what's it called? I don't need to attack them, right? I get to, being part of Western society, I get to understand them. And for me, it's really, it's always bringing the lens, turning it back around. Like, how does that relate to you as an individual? So you were taught these certain things, or you were grown in these certain environments, and um, this is, how does that play into who you are now? Is this something that you still value? Is this something that is still of value to you? Yeah, we were taught many things as children. We don't all do the same things that we were taught, and there's some things that we carry on into our adulthood, and pass on to our children. And there are other things that we discard because it's no longer of use or of value, but we don't discard it with disgust necessarily, right? For me, it's a matter of gratitude, like, thank you for how you served me, and it's no longer serving me. And so if we bring Western culture, because the truth is, we are all connected and have a lot of, like, the underlying is like the foundation is the same, right? It's how we word it that's differently, or how we practice it that's different. Um, Even if we talk about like religion, right? There's so many different religions, but in the essence of it, it is creating that relationship between the individual and some higher power. Whether you call that whatever, however you call that higher power, it's the same force, it's the same entity, right? It's the same practice. So for me, it's the more that I understand the individual, the better that I'm I guess able to engage with them. And for me, again, it's not a matter of imposing my own. It's if I understand kind of their beliefs, then I can incorporate and integrate their beliefs into whatever's going on. I'm not a master of every single culture. However, there are certain commonalities between, and it's drawing kind of finding the points of convergence, so that, like, that's like kind of the liftoff point, if you will. Um, you mentioned ayahuasca, right? And that's part of that is a releasing the ego to access kind of the subconscious, which is what counseling, right, is in Western society. It is to navigate with the ego, but to also delve deeper into what's going on within the subconscious, and possibly even engage the unconscious and integrate both, all three, the consciousness, the subconsciousness, the unconscious, and understanding that there's things that we know. There's things that we know that we know. There's things that we know that we don't know. There's things that we don't know that we know. There's things that we don't know that we don't know. And kind of being open to how that shows up at any given point, and allowing all of those to kind of take part into our lives without battle, so to speak.
Now, I'm glad you are able to speak to it, because I do want I don't want to say real life, but someone who has dealt with some capacity with ayahuasca, because I don't know what's on the other side of that, experience. And so, being a person who's familiar with it, is there any knowledge that you wanted to impart to anyone that's unfamiliar about ayahuasca, or just in general, your experience around being with the knowledge of ayahuasca?
Um, I mean, I'm no expert. It's plant medicine, and to me, that's part of like the oldest, right? That's the oldest medicine. I think there's a lot of fear around ayahuasca, and it gets kind of improperly, unfortunately, kind of marked as like it's a drug. It's, you know, it's bad because people often fear the unknown. Each experience is really individual from what I mean, different people who I have spoken with, and even in having the experience myself, each experience is different. Not There's no one size fits all, right? There's no way to kind of say, oh, well, what can I expect? It's kind of hard to say what you can expect. There are certain things, like certain, I guess, themes. Sometimes there is a like an unleashing or a releasing, where sometimes on it people kind of are able to move through some really deep issues, or not even deep issues, but not it's not on a cognitive conscious sense. It's like it's almost released, like the energy is unleashed from the body. And so, you know, whether it's people may have the experience of like wailing or crying, or, you know, some people just sleep, and it's like they have these vivid, seemingly vivid dreams where they're moving through some experiences. Sometimes it's they'll say it's like it's not this life, but it was definitely me. I felt like I moved through several iterations of myself. And it's kind of unpacking um what I'm carrying kind of in this iteration of me. Some people have experienced kind of almost being in surgery. It's like a stitching together, where there is like literally has been, they went in and they had experienced some type of pain or some type of something that wasn't the purpose that they were there, but then like they actually felt like it's almost like there was somebody like working on their body. And what I understand it to do is to, like I said, release the consciousness, release the hold, right? Because we are so, especially within Western society, so ego driven and so attached to the ego. Like and the ego is often about control. I have to know, I have to control, I have to be able to explain, I have to, like, I need to have all of the answers. And when we operate in that state, we often are limiting ourselves from our fullest potential and from the fullness of who we are, because some things are unexplainable, right? And even in society, like, we get hits of intuition all the time. And if we are looking constantly for that answer of what does that mean? What is that? I can't follow that unless I know where that comes from, then we're limited, right? It's like our world becomes this closed in box, right? You're walking down the street and something says, move to the other side of the street, and you do it. And lo and behold, 2 seconds later, you see a car jumps the curb, and you're like, oh my gosh, if I would have stayed, like, I don't even know how that happened. Something told me to like, that's not explainable. That's not your ego. That's not you knowing. That's not you being able to forecast the next second, right? And so, what ayahuasca and other plant medicines, I think, are very successful in doing is releasing that hold of the ego, to kind of like say, okay, the ego, we can put that aside, and the person is safe and they can still operate, and it opens them up to a greater aspect of themselves. However, I will say we always remain at choice, and we always remain in control to some extent. So there has to be a willingness, right? If somebody goes in and they're like, this is not going to have any effect, and I'm not going to, you know, I don't care what anybody says, and it doesn't matter, it may not. It may not have an effect, because if they're that strongly entrenched in whatever their belief is, the belief is what dictates, right? The law of mind action, the belief is what dictates ultimately how we act in the world, how we act within ourselves. And so the willingness to have the experience is what kind of sets the stage for the experience to then happen. And that also can determine kind of what the experience the person has. So a lot of people will go into it with certain mindsets, right? Like ayahuasca has been used to support people with addiction. And so certain people are like, I want to kick my habit. Like, I've been battling this addiction for several years, and I've done everything, and I just want to kick it. they're going in with a willingness. They're going in with the intention. They're going in with the choice, right? And so it opens up the door for them to have that experience. But if somebody goes in and says, well, I was told that this is going to help, I don't believe it's going to help, I don't think anything's going to help, I'm an addict, I'm going to be an addict for the rest of my life, it doesn't matter, but I'll try it because that's what you tell me, but I really don't believe it, then it may not have that same, because the person is always part of the equation. And if the person is not just like, maybe I'm open to it, but I don't know. If they're like entrenched in no and entrenched in resistance, right? And like not they're displaying like they're not the ready. They are displaying a lack of readiness to change. The likelihood is they're going to remain in that space, and that's okay because that's where they need to be in that moment, and that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing because for whatever reason, that's where they need to be.
No, I thank you for sharing that because it definitely is something that I'm has been calling me. I'll say it has been I have been a yearning. It's popping up, of course, in different YouTube and algorithms that they have in place. So I guess it is something that's plaguing on my soul to go do and just experience. And I heard that you can't even just do it once. You may have different experiences along the way. So I appreciate that.
I mean, I
Speaking
encourage you. I was just gonna say, I encourage you to do. I mean, different programs do different things. Some people have it like a 1 day thing. Some people, will do like a 3 day. Sometimes it's a week. Sometimes, it's like they do one and then they come back. And if you listen, I would say tune into what you like, whatever it's calling you. So obviously there's something there, and then you are your greatest source. So see how you feel. See what what's calling you in that moment, and just follow it and be open. I absolutely encourage, because you're open to it, I'd absolutely encourage you to pursue it.
But and then even in that same role, my next question, I feel like there has been a quote unquote, for lack of a better term, awakening within the Black community in regards to like mental health and just going into one to heal and certain things of that nature. In your experience, your viewpoint, and I don't know why this question has popped up, but what are some things about the subconscious mind and our, conscious mind that we should know as humans, having a human experience that a lot of people probably don't discuss as much?
So my belief, and I know some people, my belief is to be a Black person in America is to be the product of trauma, and that trauma exists within our subconscious mind, literally within our DNA. If a person is a descendant of a Black American, unless, so I mean that to say that they're not, like if a person is a first generation American, then this may not apply. However, the likelihood is, like slavery is in our every cell of our body, right? And so part of what slavery has and I think one of the things that as Black people, we often hear like, why can't we're woke, right? But we're woke, but like it doesn't change the experience. Like there's so many, we see other cultures or other ethnicities come into America, and they're shifting and they're changing and they're seeing like a different experience for themselves. And as the Black experience, I think a lot of times there's a lot of frustration because it's like, why can't we make it? Why can't, like, we get just so far? And I think part of that is there's lots of healing that needs to be done, because within our DNA, we have actualized. We are the products of trauma, right? And we don't even realize how a lot of the things that we identify as part of the Black culture can also be equated. Like I've been looking at how a lot of those things are can be equated and identified as the trauma response, right? Even the stigma that's associated with mental health, right? What goes on at home stays at home. You don't share this business. You don't tell nobody what goes on outside this house, right? That's very much part of our culture. If you look at trauma, that's also the isolation, right? You can't tell anybody. You can't. and then looking at that, right? How does that become something that's so ingrained in us, even if you've never heard it, even if you have families who are like my parents, my grandparents never said that to me, but I've always known like what goes in and at home stays at home. It's in our DNA, it's in our subconscious mind. And if you look at slavery, for instance, there is a lot of secrecy. You had to keep things undercover. You could not let, the overseer or whatever, the plantation owners or whatever it was, you couldn't let it be known that you were learning how to read. You couldn't let it be known that someone was planning to, flee. You couldn't let it be. So all of that, and why? Because there was a risk of death, right? There was a risk of violence, which there was a risk of trauma. I mean, people were traumatized, and so we have incorporated it and have integrated into our mind, subconscious mind, like that isolation, not trusting anyone, not believing that people are genuinely good or have we're mistrusting, even like subconsciously somebody, you're in a supermarket and you don't have enough to pay for whatever reason, and somebody, especially someone not of the same color, offers you, it's okay here, and it's like, what do you want? What do you want from it? What are they trying to do? I didn't, we're very suspicious. Just we carry that like suspicious nature in general. Then that comes from kind of our subconscious, the subconscious mind, and some of the healing, or not some of the healing, sorry, some of the wounds that I think even from like ancestral wounds that have gone generation after generation after generation after generation. The whole kind of the strive for perfectionism, right? Like we were indoctrinated into this whole, even if you look at, again, if we go back to slavery, right? Not seeming like anything was wrong, right? Like being of sound body and, having nice teeth or whatever. So always having to kind of put our best foot forward and not being able to be human, right? We are dehumanized, even as we were considered animals. We were dehumanized, and we've taken that on, and we continue to have that. Like, it's not okay to not be perfect. It's not okay to show our imperfections. It's not okay to make a mistake. It's not okay to say I apologize, because in some way we then fall as like less valuable, right? That our value is somehow equated with our ability to be perfect. And I'm waiting for somebody to show me the perfect person. I've yet to see, hear, meet a perfect person, lived now or in any other time, who has a perfect person. I'm waiting. And when somebody has it for me, like I said, I'm human, so I'm willing to be incorrect, but I've yet to see perfection other than being perfectly imperfect as each individual. So
yeah. I want you to know now that that might be the title of the podcast. Trauma is in our DNA. Because we don't even realize we've been bred that way. It's just like animals have been bred to be vicious or domesticated or whatever the case may be. You can be bred traumatically, and I think that's a message that a lot of people probably need to hear and kind of recognize.
I just wanted to say, you mentioned animals. We were bred, right? We were mind. I'm not going to use the word, but we were brainwashed to basically believe that we were animals. So if you tell somebody enough and call somebody enough something, they will begin to believe it. So so it's not far-fetched that we would then see many generations later animalistic type tendencies, right? Like, not saying that we are animals, but we can be vicious, especially to each other. We were indoctrinated into that mindset. We were traumatized. Being Black is PTSD can be synonymous with being of color, especially being of any type of descendant of Black America. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong, and it doesn't mean that there is definitely something wrong in that experience, but not wrong with the individual. It just means that there's some deep healing that potentially that may need to happen, and that there's some beliefs that are that we hold, that we may not even realize that we hold, about ourselves, about the world, about other people, that then give rise to our actions and our thoughts, our other subsequent thoughts and our feelings and the way that we operate within the world. And so being willing to kind of just examine, explore, and potentially remove, like surgically remove some of those skewed beliefs, um, will is what is like how to navigate through the trauma. And unfortunately, what trauma does is it isolates. It causes people to feel alone and to feel like no one's going to understand. And sometimes it causes fear. So it's like I can't share. And what really needs to happen is like a coming together in the community and sharing experiences, and to be able to say it's not to normalize the trauma, to say that it's okay to experience trauma. It's to normalize that trauma occurs, and it's okay to have that conversation. Because part of our experience, I mean, I can say personally, people would say, have you ever experienced trauma? And I was like, that's life. Like, what do you mean? No, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's life. And didn't understand even like what that meant, because I like that was my day-to-day life. That's what, many of us experience. And so I just wanted to say it's not surprising to me that this many years, generations later, there's still the language around Black people in America as animals and vicious and, animalistic. Yeah, well, there was a lot of conditioning to create that, so it was
Now,
successful.
that's it actually moved into one of my questions, and it's a big one. So let me know if you want to take it any direction you want to answer it. Is can healing truly happen in our community when we've been bred a certain type of way? And I think about, for example, certain dogs have to be put to sleep because of the way they were bred, and you the conditioning is so strong that it's hard for it to turn it off. And I can add the opposite end of it, where um some people are so racist that in order for that type of mindset to stop, they have to be dead and gone, or they have to be, exiled from the human experience. And so my question to you is, can we truly heal from certain things when that is our conditioning?
So that is a big question. I mean, I would say, I guess what how I view it is, I don't know if it's so much as healing. Yes, I do think that we can be healed. I think it's recovery,
Mm.
right? So I mean, I have a scar that's on my face, on my nose. What when I was younger, I was on a bike, and I was hit by a car, and I like flew over the handlebars, and so I hit my face. It's healed, it's recovered, right? But there's still evidence of it. There's still evidence. Like, so I think that people have this false belief or understanding that healing eradicates, or like healing means that it is completely like that my nose somehow would not have a scar on it. I mean, I can get it removed. However, it's still, even though it is healed, I've recovered, there's still evidence of it. So I think that some of the languaging, and unfortunately, I think languaging is problematic because it is a human construct, and it has different meanings for different people at different times. However, I think that yes, ultimately we can. I think that what you have mentioned is it's accurate though. Not everybody is in a place of healing and recovery. Not everybody is willing. And if we go back to what I said before, like there has to be a willingness, right? There has to be an ability, a willingness, and a readiness in order to do anything, right? In anything that we do, you have to be ready, willing, and able. If one of those conditions are not met, then it's not likely to be successful in going forward. And I think that a lot of people are not ready, a lot of people are not willing, and a lot of people are not able, and all of the different combinations of those three. Some people are maybe ready but not willing or able for whatever reason. um I think that we're moving closer to that in kind of the awakening. And I don't mean the awakening in so far as awareness of how bad it is. I think it's an awakening in that, wait a second, I am an empowered person. As much as I have been disempowered and disenfranchised and marginalized and told that I am an animal or told that I'm less than, I always have power. And if I stand in my power and choose to claim my power and operate in that power, that I can make shifts and I can make changes within myself and within my lineage, right? And that goes forward and backwards. I think it's also, there needs to be ancestral healing. And that's a big thing that goes on, because healing is not stagnant. Even if we think of, there's different levels. Even if we think of a physical injury, there's often different levels of healing, right? You think of a burn, and they leave it open. They leave the skin open. They debride it, right? Because it has to be different levels of healing. There's different layers of the skin that need to kind of be brought together, and they don't just say, "Oh, okay, this one part is healed, so now go ahead, you're on." Right? You're prone to infection if you don't look at the whole picture. And I think that we as individuals are merely one moment in time. We have Ancestral, which was before us, and we have our progeny, which is either here and yet to come. And we also have, we're interrelated. And so I think the more that we realize that we're actually empowered and that we are powerful as beings, as individuals, that 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 recovery will occur. And as more and more, the more that we're willing to have those conversations and to be able to just really acknowledge that vulnerability is not weakness, that vulnerability is actually strength, right? That to love is not to be weak, or to love is not to be, like, even if you think about people in relationships, oh, like, you're whipped or whatever. I'm dating myself because that's an old school term, but it's like, oh, like somebody got power over you, and they only have power. They only have the power that we allow them to have, and we for so long have allowed people to have to disempower us and take power over our bodies, our minds, and even our hearts. And as we move towards doing that more and more, it means stopping that and taking ownership of our own selves and our lineages. I think that we can move closer towards trauma recovery. It doesn't eradicate it, and like I said, it's life's work, right? It's always figuring out, like, how is this showing up, when is this showing up? Okay, I addressed this one level, there may be another level, right? And being open to it. It's not like, oh, I healed this, why is this still showing up? Because there's so many different levels, and it's been so entrenched that we don't realize how deep it is within ourselves.
Man, I done went on a spiritual journey through this whole conversation just alone in just so many different places. Again, I have never talked about like ayahuasca. Then you just made it simple of like, hey, generation of healing goes forward and backwards. I think we focus a lot on like breaking these generational things, but think about the future, not realizing it goes back and forth along the journey as well. One of the questions I guess I wanted to ask to you as well, while also highlighting the offerings and the things that you do in every capacity as well. I definitely need a hoodie to make it, especially for the fall coming up. So I'll be sure to like purchase mine. But um I'm curious to, and I always ask this with clinicians as well, to just like pick their brain, because it's from where I come from. Like I'm in school now, in hopes of becoming a clinician again to get the letters. But I started out being a coach, and doing it in that capacity. So in your perspective, your experience, the work that you do, what's the difference between clinician and coach? I know they come from the same individual sometimes, but there is a difference. And to you, that means what?
I knew that question was coming. I knew it yesterday. Something I don't even. So it was funny because I was sitting there and I was like, "He's gonna ask me the difference between clinician and coach." And while I expect the question and anticipate the question, I sometimes dislike the question. Only because I think that, I think it's necessary, because I think that people need to understand. But I also think that we often look to nitpick and pick things apart to, um So what I would say is coaching. Coaching is coaching is when someone has identified something that they desire and they look for support to achieve it, right? So if we take basketball, um, you have a young person who wants to be in the NBA, right? And they may be really skilled and they may be gifted, but they are looking to also develop that gift into skill, right? And so they will work with someone who can um identify, like, okay, these are some areas that you are naturally gifted at. Let's bring technique in, so that it's not when you shoot the basketball up, you don't know if it's going to make, like, as soon as it leaves your fingers, like, whether that's going to hit the basket or not, because you've developed that skill, you've developed that technique, you've developed, right? They can hone in. A coach will pick and be able to say, okay, these are some areas that I'm seeing, but it's really, the coach is working with you or with the individual to meet the intended goal. What is the intention? What is the goal? What is the, how do you get from this point to that point? As a counselor, I guess counseling is, people often want to either understand why, or like, why am I this way? How, and not just like, yes, how do I change? But a lot of times it's like, why do I keep doing the same thing? Or why do I have to deal with whatever this is? Why do I get nervous every time I'm on the bus? And how do I change that? A coach, right, may work with the person to kind of shift that behavior, which is, there's a lot of overlap. So a counselor may do that as well, but the coach may not be as concerned, focused. Let me say focused, because I don't want to say that a coach is not concerned, but maybe not be focused on kind of how that came to be, right? A coach is more like, okay, so there's some fear about being on the bus. You want to be able to ride the bus. Let's figure out how you can start riding the bus. Let's look at, right, there is overlap in terms of, what do you believe about the bus? What are some things that set you off? And then how do we get there? How do we get to you being able to ride the bus? Whereas a counselor, I think, is kind of supporting the person to, one, understand thoughts and feelings, and how that come into play in actions, and also, like, where did it start? How did you learn this behavior? um Unfortunately, I think a lot of times in counseling, I am not the biggest fan of diagnoses. I will say, I know that there's some people who are probably going to be like, um, I think that there's a use for them, and I think it's important. I think that the use is to be able to have like a common understanding, a common term, to be able to have, whether it's the client and the clinician coming together to say, okay, this is the thing that we're talking about. So we're going to name it anxiety, and we may talk about, that as a thing. But I think that it creates its whole other dynamic, that when we are so strong, heavy on diagnosing, that people are then also accepting an identity, because when you hear anxiety, there is a stigma, there is a something, everything, like, everybody has, as soon as you say anxiety, there is not one person who won't have a picture, a sense, a memory, something that they can associate it with, right? Whether it relates to them personally or somebody else. And so when you give somebody a diagnosis, then whatever their understanding is of that diagnosis, they then embody and then live out. It's in the mind, so then it becomes their action, and then they own it, right? Like, I, I'm an anxious person. Don't own that. No, you are navigating anxiety. So that was my little soapbox on diagnosis. But let me go back to, so a counselor, can, like, I think what what counseling does is, it doesn't have to be past focused, but a lot of times counseling kind of looks backward to kind of early childhood. Where did you learn that? How did you learn that behavior? Or how did you, where was that? Where did that come up? How did you develop that thinking or that mindset or those, where did those feelings, where was the hurt? And can support the individual to develop kind of the skills, the toolbox, if you will, to navigate in that either in that particular area or potentially in life. Whereas a coach is looking to refine, right? There's still, like I said, there's going to be overlap. There's obviously you're going to, in coaching you teach skills and you support an individual in developing skills. In counseling, you do the same thing, but a coach is looking to hone and refine. Whereas I think a counselor may be looking to kind of create the toolbox, so to speak, or not necessarily create it because it's already created, but like open the toolbox, open the person's awareness to their own toolbox and support them in using the tool like on a day-to-day basis and seeing how it shows up in their life.
Yeah, for a person that didn't have an answer, that was very very detailed in the explanation. So I think you did a wonderful job of it. My final question is one of new that I'm going to start asking just because these type of when I start to look at these interviews and have these type of conversations, they're going to live on forever. And hopefully, if God willing, there's always a medium that these interviews will be expressed through, and there will be future generations that watch these from my lineage, from all of our lineages. With that knowledge or that idea in mind, what would you want your future generations to know about you, and how do you want to be remembered when they talk about you?
Wow. That's probably the hardest, biggest question you've asked me thus far. Okay. Oh, what do I want them to remember? That Oh my gosh, you stumped me. I mean, I have so much, and at the same time, I don't even have words. I want to be remembered for my heart, I guess. That my heart is my source. My heart is my fuel. My heart is what connects me to each and every other individual. And that, I mean, the saying, charge it to my head, not my heart, um, it really holds true for me that I'm human and I make mistakes and I'm human and I um, may act in a way that doesn't that's incongruent, I guess, with maybe with the way somebody else um, may desire or whatever. However, it is not from an area of malice that I genuinely have love and regard and compassion for people, and I want to be known for that compassion. I genuinely am committed and want to see the healing and recovery. Um, I would love to be known as the trauma professional, but not from like almost like the Harriet Tubman of trauma, right? Like navigating people through the recovery from the place of trauma to the place of freedom, to be known as joyful freedom, to be known as that person who walked the road with individuals, who walks my own road every single day, who supports the recovery of from trauma into freedom and into a place of love and acceptance, self acceptance, because I think that it starts with self first, awareness, ownership, um, and I think I said love, but definitely love. So, yeah.
The Harriet Tubman of trauma is a mic drop. That's That's a shirt. That's man, that is beautiful. And mind you, you setting the tone for a bunch of I'm going to ask this question to everyone else moving forward, because again, these are little moments of time that they may be insignificant to us in the moment because of like, all right, we're in life and things are happening. But when you look, my great grandkids are going to watch this and be like, man, let me get an idea of like, I wish I could have heard Martin Luther King on a regular conversation, or Bob Marley was one of my favorite. Like, all right, what, and they're only a limited amount of interviews of them out there now. And now they're like precious gold. So I'm like, or if it's so, if they would have asked them this, or if they would have asked them this, like I try to treat it like that moving forward, treating it as a responsibility to ask certain things that cements a person's legacy, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, you're speaking about kind of our whole like shifting coming into um the now, right? Because I mean, traditionally we're not a written, right? Like things are passed down through word of mouth, and that's not word of mouth, but like storytelling and through verbal, from generation to generation. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And while I don't want to see that completely removed, I also want to see for us a a development, right? Like we need to progress. That holding on to old ways is not to become entrenched in old ways that we can only do the old ways. It's incorporating, antiquity with modernity, right? That progress comes from all of that. And so if like there's no more that we're way way back, we were sitting at the foot of our elders and we had nothing but time to just hear the stories and to receive and have and have the wisdom imparted upon us, either by hearing like our elders speaking or seeing our elders in community. And we don't do that anymore because we're not that we don't want to. um the way that technology and progress has imprinted on our lives, that there's a lot of separation, there's a lot of individualization. People have to work in order to make a living, so you don't have the same level of time. And so sometimes we do need to record, right? Whether it's recording on in written language or recording in video or digitizing, whatever it is, like passing this on to generations. These are the goals, these are the jewels, these are the jewels of what we have. And so what you're doing, I think, is phenomenal, and I applaud you for not just identifying as a responsibility, but like accepting it, because these are the things. I mean, even my children now, tell me a story when you such and such and such and such, right? And it's helpful when I have a picture and I can be like, right? And it's like, but me, when I'm describing it, sometimes I can't even fathom what I'm
Mhm,
talking about, because it's, what do you mean you didn't have internet? Like, what do you
mm.
mean, everybody wasn't walking around with a cell phone? What do you mean, like, you had to have change and use they're like, what are you talking about? Like, so
Nah, that
I
is
think
so
it's
true. That is so true, and it's important, like you said, being at the foot of our ancestors. And it's all one of the biggest regrets is that I didn't talk to my grandmother more to get some of that essence. And again, I would have loved to hear her speak, but I did want to ask if there was any final thoughts or any final messages, but I don't know if you summed it up already. I feel like you just gave it. The Harriet Tubman of trauma. I it might be in the convenience of the or a competition of the title of the podcast, because I actually like that one now too, if I'm being honest.
Well, if that listen, if I can do any aspect of that and be like, if that if I'm known for even an aspect of that, I will consider this to be a successful journey of this lived experience. So
Mhm.
absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
Well, I thank you again for coming on. Please share everything that we had in this conversation. Leave a comment somewhere. Just share a clip of this or somewhere. Like it was so many different levels of discussion within this conversation that I think I gotta run it back to catch everything that was there, because when you win it, you miss certain things. So I
Hmm.
appreciate that. All the jewels and different things that you dropped. And remember to subscribe and do all that good stuff too, because it'll help tell everybody why this conversation was such needed. And last but not least, please always remember that this platform has never been about being a replacement to therapy. It's an alternative place where people share therapeutic stories. Thank you for listening.